So Cyberpunk 2077 is on the verge of release in the next few weeks. The makers of The Witcher 3, which not only won Game of the Year, but is touted as one of the best RPG games ever made to date. I want to go through some of the most anticipated features I want to get out of Cyberpunk, and use this video as a checkpoint to when I ultimately come to reviewing the game. So let's get into it. One of the core problems in the modern gaming industry is the current open world design. We're looking at bigger and bigger worlds, but with content that's either few and far between, or with content that barely passes as filler, such as fetch quests and the like. It's understandable why they do this. Having a massive open space is good for marketing, but it frankly is one of my pet peeves to press forward on my controller for 10 minutes just to get the next location where there's some activities to do. Some games embrace this to varying degrees of success, like Red Dead Redemption 2 for example, but other games don't. It's this concept of content-rich areas divided by massive gaps which I'm hoping Cyberpunk has nailed down. I want to roam a content-rich world, a bit like how Zelda Breath of the Wild approached open world design, where activities were dotted all over the place that constantly distracted you. Looking at what we've seen so far in gameplay, I think it's safe to say there's definitely an attempt at doing this, except for some concerns I have around the desert footage, which we'll have to see about. Perhaps linked directly to open world design is the open world itself. Usually buildings and landscapes are essentially obstacles to navigate around, rather than something you can explore. In Cyberpunk, I'd like to see an emphasis on creating richer environments, rather than stereotypically set dressing you can see a lot of the time in modern game design. Now, a lot of this is probably a complex mix of time and resources. After all, creating and implementing an open world to explore with building interiors that you can navigate around is probably equal to the amount of work around building two separate games. There are also the performance optimizations to consider as well. I mean, at the end of the day, this needs to run on the OG Xbox, which is drastically underpowered compared to modern day PCs. It's this lowest common denominator that might force CD Projekt Red's hand, and if so, I hope at the very least they have opted for a more compact cityscape with a smaller map and the like. Quality over quantity, as they say. It's fairly common knowledge that games as a service is a pretty failed concept to hardcore gamers, and it's not that understandable to consider why. Games as a service not only promotes the notion of releasing a product with the idea of releasing further content down the line, leading to the game missing parts of it that would make it interesting to begin with, but it fundamentally also promotes a model that relies on continued income to fund such further updates to the game. In itself, this usually influences the game's design to a point where it's more about ensuring there is a continuous development stream to fund future updates to the game, rather than just relying on the initial sale itself. Not addressing issues like this head on leads to speculation which can make the thing worse altogether. But at least for now, it's been made clear by CD Projekt Red that microtransactions will be kept in the multiplayer part of the game only. I hope this indeed comes to fruition on the game's release, as the development team have already built a strong trust with their customer base on this very notion, so hopefully it's something they'll end up honouring, unlike other publishers at the moment who seem to say one thing about a game's release and then do something completely different after. Games are way too safe at the moment, and perhaps purposely so. I mean, why would you want to cut off a wide margin of your market if you're just in the business of making as much money off the medium as possible? Unfortunately, again, there are a lot of guilty publishers when it comes to this same concept. The problem being this ultimately sacrifices the artistic vision of the game. I want Cyberpunk to tell its story without any of these roadblocks, and I want it to go further, not just for the sake of shock value, but really to explore the world and the stories and issues that are presented when living in a reality like this. I don't want my immersion to be broken just because the issue would be considered as not mainstream enough for mass markets. And lastly is performance. I'm sincerely hoping that this game runs as smooth as possible. I'm pretty much done with games trying to reach 30 frames per second as a minimum already, and sometimes games barely meeting that consistently. And it's honestly one of the things I'm most excited for in the next generation consoles. That's right. I'm buying a next-gen console because I want a more consistent frame rate, not just because of the better graphics. Cyberpunk has already had several delays, and the most recent is portrayed around optimizations and bug fixes, a task that is no mean feat when they have to optimize for 9 different versions of this game. Perhaps they didn't initially plan on it being so many versions, but the delays around the game have probably forced their hand. My concern though is how this is going to impact the game's performance, and if they need more time to get the game running properly. Again, not to hark on the Xbox One, but the Xbox One has to run this game at a consistent frame rate, although understandably less, and even they admitted in their own tweet that the game at some point along the way became next gen. Some people have also talked about a staggered release, but that in itself is probably spreading the developers' resources even more thinly, and let's be honest, it isn't exactly good PR if some people get the game and others don't. I'm hoping CD Projekt Red can really nail this one down. As said before, this is one of the things that at least personally for me can really ruin a video game. There are games I can't even play now like Warzone because I look left and right and the frames crash all over the place and it makes me want to throw up. These are the things that are on my list at least, and if Cyberpunk can achieve these things, I do think the game will define the next gen standard for all future RPGs. When the game does come out, I'll do a review and compare it to this video and see if it meets my expectations. But in the meantime, let me know what you're looking forward to most in Cyberpunk in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.